Welcome to Retro Fanfic Retrospective, the podcast where we dredge up old fanfiction and expose it to the cold, harsh light of 2019. My name is Amato, and with me are...
Tori.
And Chris.
Yes, Chris, thank you for coming in to fill in with Dom tonight.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm sorry, I said fill in with Dom. I meant fill in for Dom.
Yeah.
Dom is not also here.
Either of those things.
Yeah, you're the second in our 3 weeks without Dom, and... we just needed some bodies to fill this space.
Yeah.
It's good to know that I'm appreciated.
What I said last week when I invited you, Chris, is what I appreciate about you is that you are familiar with everything.
I try to be, certainly.
Yeah. No.
Familiar with, like, everything that we would ever be likely to talk about. Yeah, I mean, I guess we're all pretty well-read geekery-wise, right?
I think we're well read. I just think Chris has a better memory than I do.
Yeah.
Like, especially for details. And, like, I can be really passionate about something and then I might know all the details. But, like, as far as everything that I'm interested in, it's like, especially speaking of Final Fantasy VII, I did not remember a lot of the details. And Chris kind of helped me out with that, so...
Well, I aim for encyclopedic, and I probably fall a bit short of the mark most of the time, but...
I do remember the last time I was on with you, Chris, was for the Gundam Wing fanfic.
Yeah.
And Tori, you'd certainly had feelings, and Chris,
Yeah.
you certainly had, like, remembering exactly what had happened in Gundam Wing.
Yes.
Which was good for that one especially.
Yeah, well, I tried. I feel like I probably still got a couple of details wrong. Actually, I know I got a couple of details wrong, but the general... course of it.
That's
you
okay.
had the details. Unlike me, where I'm like, I feel like this is true. Somebody please help me.
Last week we did a CSI Charlie and the Chocolate Factory crossover, and Dom wasn't there for that either. And afterwards, Dom, having, listened to the recording to edit it, complained to me that none of us know anything about CSI, and we were making huge mistakes.
I was remembering NCIS, and Dom texted me and was like, the goth girls from NCIS, and I was just like, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Well, it's not like Final Fantasy VII has any passionate fans, right? Who care deeply about it and will get upset if we make any mistakes.
At least I know about Final Fantasy VII, whereas apparently I know nothing about CSI. So as long as we've clarified that, I'm going to make a public apology about my lack of CSI knowledge for any of the listeners who heard me last week getting, everything messed up detail-wise.
So, Tori, what is your background with Final Fantasy VII? We'll go around. We'll start with you.
I played it.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I watched Advent Children, which is not referenced in this fanfic because it came up before Advent Children.
Long before Advent Children.
Yes. But to be honest, it's been so long since I have played Final Fantasy VII. I probably haven't played it since I was a teenager, like maybe 17. Most of my memory is from watching Advent Children, because it's way easier to go back and watch Advent Children than it is to go back and replay all of Final Fantasy VII. Though this kind of inspired me to want to do that. Mm-hmm. So I went back, though, and I did look up like a full plot summary and like all of the character summaries to make sure that I had all of the important details remembered for this. And I actually surprised myself. I remembered more than I thought I would, so. I feel like I should say something more about how the game affected me. It's just a very beautifully made game. And Chris was saying before, like, the characters have so much depth in a way you don't get in RPGs. And I feel like when I did play it felt like a full immersive experience. And I also, like, one of the first times you see, like, eco-terrorists being the protagonists, I really enjoyed that component, especially when I was, like, 17 years old. I kind of looked up to, especially Tifa, too, being a martial artist, was one of my favorite characters for a really long time, because I was, like, eco-terrorist martial artist, that's awesome.
I mean, in 2019, I feel like we're about one more Mako reactor away from needing to go bomb some things ourselves, right? Maybe I shouldn't say that on air.
Yeah, completely in a I'm just kidding NSA kind of way.
Right.
Right?
I'm
yes,
just
of
kidding.
course. Yeah. We would never do any acts of eco-terrorism, and you can quote me on that.
Please also don't create any any power reactors that, suck up souls from the world life. And, that'll help too.
Well, and kill the planet's capacity to, like, actually create and sustain life on
Right.
a
Well,
global
that's-
scale. Well, yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
close. Resonant metaphor and whatever.
Yeah. There's the last thing I wanted to say about my relationship with Final Fantasy VII is that my dog's name is Red, and Red 13 is one of my favorite characters. When I was reading this fanfic, I kept thinking about my dog and imagining that it was my dog talking, but
Red is a cool character, and I like Red, but I never ever used Red in the game. And let me tell you why.
Okay.
Can you guess?
Because there are so many other really good characters to put in your party.
There's also a really good reason. But it's because Red's model doesn't change when you change his weapon. And I just could not stand that. I want to see that weapon change. Like, I want to equip a cool new weapon and see them holding it. I want to, like, equip a boxing glove on Barrett. And with Red, you just don't get that.
That is kind of a place of lacking, because I had Red in my party all the time because I loved like imagining being this like lion wolf beast and fighting, but it would have been so much cooler if you could equip something and have that appear. I really missed out with that.
I just had certain priorities for my characters.
Clearly the truly important things, not like their depth and their development as a character.
You two are mentioning depth, and thinking back on it, especially after reading this fanfic, I was like, yeah, every single character in that game gets major emotional beats.
Yeah.
Like, everyone up to Kate Sith, or Ketchi. I mean, what are we actually going to say?
That is a good question,
because I certainly said Kate Sith.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, all my life playing that game, and then I actually learned the mythology underlying it and how to pronounce actual Gaelic, I think.
Yeah. It's going to have to be Kate Sith, right? Like, this is a 1998 fanfic. No one was saying Ketchi in 1998.
Well, I'm also probably going to use Aerith quite a bit, and I won't be able to stop myself. I'm sorry, in spite of the fact that the title is or of the first fanfiction is at least of the search for Aeris.
Yeah, I think it's been a long time though since like they corrected themselves to Aerith.
Everything since the original game.
Oh yeah,
they corrected themselves.
Yeah, because that was a translation. That was very clearly a translation error.
Right. Well, what about you, Chris? Were you any deeper into the game than Tori? 7 specifically?
Oh, I mean, I honestly think that in spite of all of the hype that it's gotten throughout its existence, that it is honestly still kind of underrated as a game. I was immensely affected by it playing it. I have played it through it several times. I've also watched Advent Children, played through most of the rest of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. I don't consider them to be quite as good games, but I still like them. And yeah, like, growing up, this was one of those pieces of media that affected me on a deep level, and I have a lot of empathy with a lot of these characters. So, sort of, I gain a lot of my philosophy and the belief system that I've developed out of looking at how these deep characters in pieces of media that are truly well written interact with the world. So I definitely feel that this is something this is a piece of media that is important to me.
Yeah, I mean, I played it when I was relatively young too. We got it for the computer, which was a port that actually worked really well, which in retrospect surprises me, but like we never ran into any bugs or any problems, and the controls seemed fine and all that. We didn't have a PlayStation. And when I say we, I mean my sister and I, because we played through it together at least the first time. I think I must have played through it again by myself at some point, because I remember it too well to have just played through it once, even though a lot of it is also just very memorable. There's a lot of memorable locations and like memorable parts of that game, which is definitely part of its strength. Spending the first like whole chunk of the game stuck in Midgar and then like eventually leaving Midgar and you're like, whoa, I'm out of Midgar. You know, it's all such really memorable design.
Yeah, oh yeah. And yeah, there's definitely having very interesting locations and having a very interesting world is another huge advantage that this game had. Like, it's well written in a variety of different factors.
Yeah, to me, it holds together, like, better than... I mean, I want to say better than a lot of the other Final Fantasy games. Those are all pretty well done games. But
I think you're right. Like,
what? Yeah, do you agree? Or?
I do agree. Like, I don't know. I was just comparing it to 8, which we played also. 8 has cool things, but none of the characters... not none of the characters. I mean, I've never thought about it in this sense, but I was just commenting how like every character in Final Fantasy VII is distinct and has their own distinct major emotional like parts. That's not the case in 8. In 8, like a bunch of them are from the same school and a bunch of them just don't matter.
Yeah. Well,
like,
in the ending to 8, like I played 8 before I played 7. It was the first Final Fantasy game I played. That ending just like threw me. I was like, and they all like went to kindergarten together, and like it's like this weird happenstance. I don't even remember it very well. It felt forced.
No, that's not the ending, right? You're talking about
in the middle.
In the middle.
I do love how they have that huge revelation drop, and no one ever mentions it again, and it's fine. It's like, oh, and using Guardian Force destroys your memory.
I mean, to be fair, they do have a decent number of bits of foreshadowing, but you really have to follow them if you want to like get that emotion. Like, I can understand why people miss it, but you do have like a bunch of hallucinations where you live the lives of people who have previously lived up until that point.
Yeah, I think they were definitely working towards something in 8, but I also don't find the characters to be as like distinct as 7. So, like, not to rag on 8, it's not, like, a terrible game, but to say that 7 had really standout qualities, and, like, all of the qualities were standout. And strong characters, strong world, strong plot, strong, you know, analogies, what do I want to say?
Metaphors?
You know, no, that's still not the right word.
Similes.
Like, you know, strong meaning to the game. There's a strong allegory.
And I mean, I will always love 6, but I think I can take a step back and say 6 is not nearly as good a game as 7. There's some things I really like about 6. I like the fact there's no main character, no one main character. And if there is a main character, the main characters are Terrace and Celes. And that's like the only time that Final Fantasy has, not the only time. It's the only time for some time that Final Fantasy had female characters in the lead. And I love the structure of like opening it up later on. But it's not as compelling a game in a lot of ways as 7.
So I guess we can kind of definitively say that we're all pretty big fans of Final Fantasy VII.
Yes, and
I mean, I do want to jump into the defense of other Final Fantasy games a little bit here.
Oh,
well, we seem to be.
Okay.
They are all very good games, and I'm sure that we all believe that. But it seems a little bit like we're ragging on them a bit. I just want to make sure that is clear.
That is true. I also love 6. I don't know if I love 8, but I appreciate some things about 8. Mostly, I never wanted to leave Balam Garden. As soon as we left Balam Garden, I was sad. I wanted to work on the festival committee. That's what I wanted to do in that game.
Well, eventually you get to take it with you.
I do. That was a great moment when suddenly that's your airship. Balam Garden.
Yeah, no, I mean, where I'm coming from is just that, like, I think all the Final Fantasy games are pretty well done, but 7 is just, like, I think there's a reason it's so popular. I just think it's really, really knitted itself together. That being said, it's been a while since I've played any of the games, so I'm not gonna, be too mean to any of them. I think they're all great, but 7 just stands out to me, I guess.
All right, who's going to defend Final Fantasy 2?
I haven't played it. That is one of the 2 Final Fantasy games that I have not played.
Nobody's played it.
I mean, I like all of the other ones. Like, I like Final Fantasy. Like, even the dated qualities of Final Fantasy 1 being a very early RPG, it still has
It's pretty
some
cool as an
very
early
interesting-
RPG.
Right, it like has incredibly interesting plot when it does have plot.
Well, it's also got pretty cool systems, honestly.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like, just the fact you get to choose your party, and then also the capabilities of your party change halfway through
Yes.
if you do that quest, which you do.
Well,
and,
who doesn't?
I know, like, unless you're really...
Well, and at the time it was kind of like one of kind.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it was part of a genre. Like, it doesn't create Dragon Quest, but it was just like a really cool early JRPG,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, true,
guess
but
that's
it
probably
had a lot of elements that differentiated itself from
Yeah.
all of the other things that were around at the time.
For sure.
Well,
Like
anyway.
blatantly stealing Dungeons and Dragons monsters, which I gotta say,
Oh, yes.
I approve of.
And they've been doing it ever since.
All
A
right.
little bit.
Well, we are not the only Final Fantasy fans or the only Final Fantasy VII fans. If you weren't around in the 90s, Final Fantasy VII was a really big game that was extremely popular. And it produced some fan fiction. And some of the early fan fiction that was like noticed by fans was this series that we're diving into today, which is just called Frank Verderosa's FF7 Internet series. From circa, 1998?
That's what the publisher said on
Right.
the fanfiction publishing of it.
We're reading it on fanfiction.net, where it was posted by another person because it's been off the internet for a long time. I didn't track down the original website. It might be available by Wayback. It probably is. And I probably should have done that because it's almost certainly against the fanfiction.net terms of service to post somebody else's story and, could go down at any time. But same with Archive of Our Own, where it is definitely against the terms of service, but somebody has posted there as well. You can find the link to the current fanfiction.net postings at bit.ly/RFR series. And this is a series of 8 stories. We are reading 2 of them. The first one of which is called The Search for Aeris, and the second one being called The Red Fist.
Just to clarify, it's not called The Search for Aeris. It's called The Search for Aeris, because I guess this was before people knew that it was supposed to be Aerith. So there you go.
It was before everything. It was after the games.
Yes, to be fair and to not to spoil anything much about the fan fiction, but we also have the fact that Seng is dead in this fan fiction, which is another sort of translation error that came through in the original script.
Oh, is that right? Wait, what happened to
Yes.
Seng?
So Seng is lying unconscious, bleeding in the Temple of the Ancients when you go there.
Okay.
And then later on there is a line, which, I mean, I can understand why people thought Seng was dead, because Elena says, holds you responsible for, I think the line is something like, her boss biting it or something like that. Something
yeah, I would
very
understand why.
obviously, implying his death, which is just not a good translation.
If it was biting it, that is directly stating his death.
Yes.
Biting
Right.
it does not mean being...
Oh no, it was offing him, I think. But
yeah,
yes,
no,
that
that's-
is still very
in English,
obviously.
that means killing.
Yeah, that means killing someone. But so what was it translated from?
It was more like
Relate to us, the Japanese.
I don't.
That's not
I
what I
don't
meant.
know the Japanese. It was something just more like him having been beaten
Injured,
up or defeated
okay.
or injured. That is.
So there's probably something about him being defeated, and it was translated to be some sort of slang that meant
Wounded.
he died. Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people were confused when he shows up alive in Advent Children, but because they only played the original and they never got the
Oh yeah, I guess he does.
yeah.
I don't know if I ever even thought about that.
I can't find the
Bad
original
Tory.
Japanese, but it sounds like in some old threads, people were saying, "Oh, you messed up my boss," would be more like a more good translation. I could speak to it directly if I could find the Japanese, but I'm not going to put in the time.
Yeah. That being said, it was kind of the translation of Final Fantasy VII. Has it been retranslated at any point? Because I feel like they kind of need to do that.
I don't know, because
So it's generally really good.
Yeah.
It's generally quite good. And then every so often, it will be very bad. And I'm not
That's-
entirely certain why. It
I
feels
think-
like editors just miss some things.
Well, I don't know about 7, but if you're talking about ones like 6, the weirdness is partially because they had like a very small number of translators working on a really harsh deadline. They just had to pound it out. And I would not be surprised if it was like the same thing for 7. Like how much editing happened, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just musing here, but I know that was a thing with like some of these old game releases.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like, it's not like the translators did a bad job. It's just, it was very common for people to be trying to pound out these translations really quickly. And a lot of times that resulted in like slang being translated in really weird ways, or like trying to Americanize it in a way that like didn't necessarily make sense to Americans. So
I mean, to some
Just
extent, you always have to work around that. Good translation isn't just transliteration. It has to involve some amount of interpretation.
Yes, as someone who has
That's true.
translated a Japanese visual novel badly, I can attest to that. But we should get into the story probably, because we could talk about Final Fantasy games probably for the entire time we have available to us,
yes,
and not actually
yeah.
get to the story. This is again Frank Verderosa's Final Fantasy VII Internet series. It's from fairly shortly after the games were released, and so it was a relatively big name in Final Fantasy VII fanfiction for a little while, which explains why it didn't really need a name, except just like this guy writing a series. Maybe it wasn't even originally intended to be a series, I don't know the background. The first story is called The Search for Aeris, and how perfect is it that the first story in this is about bringing Aeris back from the dead, because there were so many rumors about like how you could revive Aeris or prevent her from dying in the game. It's like, oh, get everybody up to level 99 and then get 99 tissues and eat them. I don't know. And of course, none of them were true.
Can I just say it too, like this, considering all of that, I do think the story is done pretty respectfully for the subject matter too, because like it could have been very corny, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that said, like, not to wear a hat saying Murphy or anything, but Aerith's death is very important to the plot of Final Fantasy VII, and I can understand why a lot of people want to bring her back. She's a great character, and you definitely feel the loss, and in fact, that sort of attests to why it's important that she's dead and gone for good.
Right.
Because you really feel the loss. And
Yeah.
that's especially important to Cloud's character development.
Even gameplay-wise, it's so affecting because there's no other character that fills the gameplay role she had. Like, no one gets anything as good as Grand Gospel. Nobody's, like, quite as strong of a magic user out of the box,
Yes.
Anyway, so, right, so the fanfic.
Yes.
We start with Barrett, who's the mayor of Corel. Coral?
This-
I go with Coral. I'm
Coral.
not
Coral.
sure.
I'm
'Cause
not sure either.
None of, well, I mean, these actually probably were pronounced at some point. I always listen to Japanese, so I'm not entirely sure if their English is
Koedu? I don't know.
correct.
But yeah, this is like how many years post-game?
It's kind of hard to tell. It doesn't seem like it's
No,
that.
they mentioned it's a couple
Okay.
years. It's a few years.
I don't remember. It's enough that they've gotten their lives on a new track, but not enough that Cloud has moved on from Aerith's death. So, and
Yeah.
Barrett is the mayor, and that when I told Chris that, you're like, how? What?
Yeah, I initially heard this from Tori before I started reading, and I found it a bit of an oddity because that doesn't particularly seem like the sort of job that Barrett would really do well at.
He's sitting behind a desk, like administration stuff. That's not really.
Yes.
I guess the rules, like the laws, the bylaws of Coral, must just be that you can only lead if you have a gun for an arm, and so their options are just really limited.
Well, I will say that I kind of like this as like a video game opening, or like especially as like a sequel fan fiction where it's like I've settled down after my life of adventure. And then he's sitting at the desk and he's thinking, wow, I really wish I had some adventure. And then, of course, adventure happens.
Then a dame walks in.
Yeah, right. Like, I just like the tropiness of it. It's just kind of funny.
It's very tropey.
Yeah. I mean, fair, but the whole him sitting down and being like, man, I think there was one line in there that sort of resonated, didn't quite match with the character as far as I understand him. Is about, he had responsibilities now and couldn't take off and leave everything on some whim like he used to in the old days. That doesn't... Barrett is extraordinarily about responsibility. The whole reason that he goes on the entire first mission through the entire game of Final Fantasy VII is because he thinks he has a responsibility to the planet to stop Shinra from doing what they do.
And he didn't just take off from his team. Like, he was a leader.
Yeah.
Yes, he was a leader in Avalanche. Like, this is, like, not really a different role for him. It might be a little less exciting, but you're right. Like, the responsibility piece is not something it seems like he complained about.
I like the line, though, that for all the use he's been getting out of it, he might as well replace his gun arm with a letter opener.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative. They do have... this writer does have some quite clever lines like that, where you know, like, at least smile-worthy when you're going through and reading them.
But anyway, Tifa comes in, and she wants to talk to him first. She and Cloud are in town, and the deal is that Cloud's been, like, getting dreams that, like, there's some, like, from Aeris, it's like, there's something about Aeris, that, like, there's some way to bring back Aeris, and, like, eventually they've had to move on it. And he and Tifa, I guess, are, like, living together?
It seems like they're a couple.
But in the second fanfic, it seems like maybe they're not. It's very unclear.
Well...
So, it's stated pretty outright that they're both working at the bar that, like, I guess the new seventh heaven that Tifa's opened in Calm.
That'd be the eighth heaven, right?
Yeah, that sounds correct. Or the 14th heaven. Depends on how we're counting.
You're right. 14th heaven makes more sense.
No, the 49th heaven.
There you go.
Squared. Never mind.
Squared.
7 upscale notation 7.
Never mind.
Anyway, what were we saying? Oh yeah, so they're both working at the bar, right? Because Tifa has no career goals outside of bartending. That's fine. I guess she's a good bartender. It's fine.
I mean, she has been doing it since she's been way too young to drink, so...
Right. Anyway, so the deal is, Cloud's been having some kind of, like, dream visions about, like, Aeris being not alive, but, like, somehow... Yeah, he's convinced she's alive in some sense. And they're like, well, she's an ancient, so who knows what the rules are. Tifa is kind of, you know, she has to go along with it because it's bothering him so much. She's kind of not fully on board with this idea having any, you know, actual basis in reality. But, like, whatever. They're coming by to consult with him, even though there's no reason why, like, Barrett specifically is, like, helpful for this idea. I don't know.
I think the justification that we get is something along the lines of Tifa knows Barrett really well.
That's true.
So Barrett is someone that Tifa can confide in and maybe ask for an opinion about things that are very sensitive.
Yeah, I guess that's the idea. And Barrett, you know, is just itching for an excuse to drop all of his, like, responsibilities and go adventuring, so he does. And including, later on it's mentions, like, oh, how's Marlene doing? It's like, oh, she's doing great. And I was like, wait. What? There's not any lines given to, like, what you did with her.
Yeah.
Like, who she's staying with or anything like that. It's just like, oh yeah, she's, like, going to school. She's adapted really well. As a parent, I was like, can I get some confirmation that, like, she's not just living by herself in the house or something? There's a responsible adult around somewhere.
But this is the Final Fantasy world, so, you know, like, you can be an 8-year-old kid and live on your own and everything's chill, right?
I mean, you can definitely be a 12-year-old kid and be an incredible
okay.
badass, but Marlene has a couple more years to go until there.
This is true.
I think even at this point in canon. I mean, not in canon.
I don't
at this
know
point in the timeline.
how long it's been, so I don't know how old she'd be. But...
I'm not clear how old she was to begin with.
Yeah.
But she wasn't that old.
Yeah, very young. Still pretty young.
Anyway, so Barrett's with them. And then we don't have to do it every single time. They sort of go around and start picking up the various older characters. And, like, the party members, right? And this fanfic reads very much like the novelization of a ROM hack. Where like they had these
Is that where I thought you were
assets.
going?
They had these visual assets they could use. They can use all of the places originally in the game. They can use all the character models originally in the game with minimal changes. And they're going to reconfigure these into like a new arrangement for a new adventure where you get all your old party members back, but not new party members, because we can't program the 3D assets for the battle for new characters. Like, are you guys with me on this? That's basically kind of like how it feels.
Yeah, I can definitely see the sort of remix the game element to it.
Because they go through dungeons. It's
Yeah,
like,
yes.
like they go to consult with Red because they're like, well, if anyone knows anything about ancients, it's Red, who, you know, he's still living in Cosmo Canyon. He's kind of taken on Bogenhagen.
However,
Bogenhofen is a town in Warhammer Fantasy. Bugenhagen, kind of taken on Bugenhagen's role and like going through his library. And I do like the dichotomy that like Red is like, you know, a beast or whatever, and he's a scholar. And he's always been kind of like a quiet, you know, thoughtful character.
yeah, he's deep into philosophical, like basically everyone in the Final Fantasy universe, I guess.
Not Yuffie.
Oh, yes, you're right. Everyone besides, I pronounce it Yuffie. I'm not
Yuffie.
entirely.
Yeah.
I never heard him voiced. You know what? I've never heard them voiced in English anyway. It's probably Yuffie. Yeah.
I still say Yuffie, but
Yuffie was definitely one of my go-to party members playing through Final Fantasy VII.
Yes, she is great in spite of the fact that the only thing that she can think about is materia.
yeah, she's kind of funny though, and she's funny in fanfiction too.
Yeah,
so
she is.
I actually was like the point where like it's funny that you say a ROM hack, Amato, because maybe this is like where I was trying to get with this idea. I kept feeling like it felt like the gameplay, but
Yeah.
then there were parts like the fight scenes where I was like, this doesn't quite feel like the gameplay. Like it doesn't. It goes back and forth.
A lot of the time, it feels like the gameplay. They use specific materia. They use specific limit breaks, but I kind of thought that was classy because they're not named.
Yes, I agree with this.
It describes every time a limit break is used, they don't name it. They don't call it a limit break. Even though even in Final Fantasy VII, in like the tutorial room, they have like those kids, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm using a limit break, and I always thought that was charming too. But I think in the context of this fanfic, it's nice that they don't do that, and it's just like, oh, he did this really cool thing, and I'm like, that's Clem Hazard. Or like, that's Grand Gospel or whatever. Like,
yeah, they like don't fully go all the way towards like abstracting themselves from the game. They definitely make it feel like kind of like you're playing the game. But there's the part that made me feel most like I was playing an RPG, like maybe not Final Fantasy VII in particular, but was when Yuffie comes running in and takes them on a side quest.
Yeah. It's a lot of side quests. It's
Yeah.
like going to Red, they have to do a little side quest to like go under Cosmo Canyon because he needs to retrieve a certain book that like is talking about I forget the details. It's like I forget what's in Bugenhagen's library originally and what's in this book that they need to retrieve from an old storage area, but Red tells them about the existence of this something materia. What's it called?
Crystal materia.
Crystal materia. I wanted to say crystal materia, but I was reading Steven Universe content and I was like, am I just thinking of crystal gems or something?
Yeah, it's the crystal materia, but you know, maybe it is a crystal gem.
Could be.
In disguise.
Maybe all materia is just waiting to form holographic hard light bodies and walk around and eat hot dogs or whatever.
Because that's what the crystal gems do, is eat hot dogs.
At least one of them
Yes.
does. Anyway. The crystal materia, which it is said can revive an ancient. Revive ancients, which, okay, that's cool. I didn't actually think ancients were that biologically different than humans, but I guess it's kind of canon that they are, though, I guess.
So yeah, they definitely have different capacities than humans. They're like a different species. We get at least that much. And it is quite vague. They certainly look human, and there is some implication that humans are like their long descendants from some of the Cetra that like broke off.
Right.
What
Cetra.
we get is that they're an ancient race.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's basically all the information. Guardians of the planet and an ancient race.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that true? That's all the information?
we get a lot of different details about them at various points, but some of it's sort of speculative and some of it's from decidedly unreliable sources, namely
Hojo?
some scientists that I could name. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Well, they find out that the crystal materia was taken by Shinra and should be in Shinra headquarters in the ruins of Midgar, and then they have more fetch quests because they need to go retrieve their materia. And I do kind of like everything about this Wutai side trip. First, that all their materia is being held by Yuffie.
Yes.
And I can totally just see that where, like, she would kind of insist, right? You don't need this anymore, right? You don't need any of it.
Well, and then when they go to get it from her, well, first of all, the first thing she does is trick them into
doing another side quest.
Doing another side quest for her to pass one of her ninja skills training things with their father.
Yeah, she's like,
But-
I need these herbs to save my
Yeah.
father's life. And it's like, no, actually,
Yeah.
she was just
Yeah.
supposed to retrieve them herself as a test.
But
I
she's
mean,
scared of heights. And she had
yes,
to climb.
I mean, to be fair, that came off as a bit mean even for Yuffie, but I respect that she is sort of devious and willing
Yeah.
to like play tricks on people to get what she wants. But I mean, to be fair, the whole like stealing the party's materia in the first game was like a very like desperate emotional play by her
Yes.
in order to save her nation from being destroyed.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I
but-
like about it in this fanfic is that everybody's skeptical. They're like, really, Yuffie? She's like, yes, really, seriously,
yeah.
this is life or death. And they're like, really? She's like, yes, like, we have no time to waste, come with me. And afterwards they find out she's been lying. It's just like, God damn it,
Well,
Yuffie.
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, she gets the branch that she needs from the tree and then immediately runs off. And then, like, everyone else just immediately takes off right after her.
Right.
Because, something is definitely suspicious here.
Yeah, except for Tifa, who is the one who had to like climb all the way back down on her own, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And
They
so
left her
she's
behind.
just like, Cloud takes off and Barrett takes off. She's like, screw you guys. So this was pretty funny. But then when they finally get, ask for the materia back, they're like, Yuffie, we need our materia. She's like, you mean my materia? And that's what I thought was the funniest part. It's like, no, we told you to hold on to it until we needed it. We said you could have it until we needed it. She's like, I don't know about that.
I don't remember that part of that
Yeah.
conversation.
I guess that makes
Pretty funny.
a certain amount of sense that if you want to make sure nobody else gets it, then yeah, leave it with Yuffie.
Yes, because she will literally go to the ends of the earth if anyone tries to take it from her.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ridiculous just as a point throughout the rest of this. They've got all the material you would expect from an endgame Final Fantasy VII party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of, I don't know, it's just high-powered.
Yeah, that is an interesting point when we get to some fight scenes that occur
Yeah.
later.
My greatest disappointment is that they don't use the best materia at any point, which is enemy skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Confirmed best materia by, I think, everyone that played that game.
Half of my actions were Magic Hammer, and the other half were extremely high MP spells using the MP that I stole from Magic Hammer.
What materia did they actually end up using in these fights?
They
I
have red spamming cure.
Yes, yeah. There's that.
I mean, yeah.
but-
And there's some mention of, barrier spells being cast, whether those
Yes.
are protect or...
And we'll get to some notable materia later on that I see Chris is itching to talk about. But, from there they have to go fetch other things. They go to Midgar to get the materia. There's, like, monsters in Midgar. I, as a kid playing FF7, I had just assumed that Holy had wiped humans from the face of the earth, and that's why the last scene was the ruins of Midgar.
Oh.
Like, with
what?
Red looking out over it.
No,
That
but
was absolutely my read.
Oh, I thought the read was supposed to be like the grass is growing back and the planet is healthy.
Yeah, because
That's
all the
what I
humans
read.
are gone. That's how I read it.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's actually a fair read because the humans were the one who were fucking things up.
Right.
Yeah.
And all you see is red, right? And like a couple of little reds or something.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you see
Red and
that.
cubs.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
Hey, that would be actually a great ending. That's that would be
I'm-
a good jumping off point for my comic, which is about dogs running around in a post-human future. So.
Turn into a Final Fantasy VII fanfic, Tori.
Yeah. there you
It
go.
basically is.
I mean, I don't know that I quite agree with this, considering how much effort humans seem to be, at least some humans seem to be going through in the plot of Final Fantasy VII to stop that from happening, or like stop the planet from dying.
I think it's
But,
not
you know.
Yeah,
an
that's
unfair read of the ending. And I think, considering that I wrote an entire comic that has a very similar premise, I might read it that way now. But at the time, it seemed like because Red was a party member, it was implied that your party survived. That's how I read it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
well-
I mean, certainly he was in the same
Yeah.
place that you were when this all happened.
Yeah.
That is also a very reasonable read, and clearly, like, the author, or I guess Final Fantasy fans in general, did not interpret it the way I did as a kid. And so
Official canon seems to indicate that also humans did survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they want sequels.
Either way, it's a great ending because it implies that the planet has been healed, and that's what we really
Right.
want.
Yes.
Well, I mean, yeah, that is of vital importance because certainly if the planet dies, all of the humans die with it.
And all of the other people too.
Yeah. Yes.
And so in Midgar, they run into another party member, which is, I'm going to go with Kate Sith. I just can't not say Kate Sith. And that's super weird. It's so weird. It's so weird that they don't seem to talk to him as like, hey, what have you been doing, you human being who is remote controlling this robot?
They talk to
Instead,
him like he's literally
they
a
talk to
robot.
him like it's Kate Sith. Like, oh yeah, Kate Sith, this person we know, Kate Sith.
It's really weird.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be fair, I don't know if they even...
Don't they?
Do they learn? They learn. I think they learn Reeve's name at
yes,
some
they
point.
do.
But yes,
right?
yeah.
Don't they? We
But I mean, like they definitely know that someone's controlling it. Like they don't really know much about Reeve as a character. Other than that, he has been playing this role all of this time, and he has been helping them. Like he's sending this robot, and like after that period where he's spying on them, he does actually tend to be very helpful.
Yeah.
Throughout the rest of the plot in normal Final Fantasy VII. So.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Kate says that Godo sent him like to help them out, and they're like, that doesn't seem quite right, but I guess that's plausible. And so they let him into the party again. As an aside, I wanted to use Kate Sith, I really did, but because I was a Moogle partisan, like especially coming from Final Fantasy VI, I was like,
Yes.
I used the heck out of Mog. I'm definitely going to use Kate Sith.
Sure.
But his limits were just too bad. His limits were just not
That
good
is
enough.
fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why Tifa was in my party, because her limit gets so good.
It
I
is
mean,
extraordinary.
You're
Assuming
like,
that you could play slots well.
I could play slots okay. As a kid, at least.
Yeah.
y'all are like better game players than I am. I'm just like, I'm going to put Tifa in because she's cool and a martial artist.
Tifa's also cool and a martial
and,
artist.
and I'm going to put Red in because Red's like a dog and cool. And I literally was just like, I want to put people in that are cool,
Yeah.
that I can relate to as people.
So not Sid.
I like Sid though.
I also like Sid, but
But no, I don't think I'd sit in my party very much. I don't feel like there's much of a use for Sid in your party.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
well,
it's hard.
I mean, to be fair, there are a decent amount of differences in attack and magic stats between your characters, but like
They're
a
all
lot of
pretty
this is
interchangeable.
a lot of this is based on what materia you put on what people.
Yeah.
That's also a really good point too.
Anyway, Kate Sith joins them. Long story short, they get the materia. There's monsters around and stuff. But they also... Do they run into any, like, antagonisty people here?
Yes, they
I
do.
forget. Yeah, it's the Turks.
Yes, of course it's the
Of course,
Turks.
the Turks. It's always the Turks. And the Turks have been hired by this antagonist we've seen in the background. The Turks have been hired by this antagonist we've seen in the background, who we'll get to in a little bit, I guess. And it's like, oh, we want the crystal materia. And, they fight the Turks. It's the three Turks, because Sang is definitely dead.
Yes,
so dead.
100%.
They get some good lines. I've got to say, here, though, is one of my problems with this fanfic. Not here exactly, but here's a point where I can talk about it. There's some talk about how, like, we won, Shinra's destroyed, and that's good for the planet, and so many things are better now. Everything seems exactly the same except that Midgar's in ruins. Everything seems exactly the same. It's like the capitalist system is totally in place.
Yeah.
All of the countries seem to be pretty much the same. I mean, Wutai's doing better because, like, it's not under the thumb of Shinra, and like it's kind of the biggest city around now, I guess.
No, that's a really excellent point, though. It's like things have changed because of like kind of the Shinra not doing its thing anymore, but we don't see the planet healing itself.
But I mean, also, it's just like it's not like you don't have
that's
professional people dressed in classy suits for hire who will kill people like the Turks running around. You still do. It's like...
Yeah. Well, this is a weird thing, too, because we suddenly have the Turks as an entity outside of Shinra, because originally they were a branch of Shinra.
But now they're just like independent mercenaries.
Yeah, I guess.
It's like not really got into.
Which is weird too, because it's like, weren't they an organization like funded by Shinra?
Yeah, that's what Chris is saying.
Yeah, so like they weren't like outside contractors that Shinra hired. So why are they still working together?
It feels like this author's under the impression that they were. That's how it feels, even though it's not really gone into in detail. Because there's no like big shift in their circumstances addressed. It seems like they're just kind of going on, and what they do is get hired to do jobs.
Or the author just wanted to use that conceit to keep them in the story and keep them together.
I mean, in defense of that, they do seem to have some amount of operational freedom when they're part of Shinra. Like, there is a part in the game where you can eventually, like, just decide not to fight them because Reno is lazy.
Uh-huh.
Well, also because you help them out in Muay, but, you know, mostly because Reno's lazy.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess the fact they don't get into that speaks to, I don't know whether you call it a strength or a weakness of this fanfic, probably depends on your perspective, but the author is really concerned with keeping things moving. Things keep moving. At no point does this, like, stop into like any kind of navel gazing or like long exposition background. Nothing. Like, I mean, you might hear something briefly, but then they just keep going.
Yes. And I don't know if this is the correct point to bring this up, but sometimes at the expense of other parts which are kind of necessary to a story, like descriptions of the areas that we're in.
Oh, we played through the game. You know what it looks like, right?
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, you can fill in, but other times, especially things that weren't originally in the game.
It's true, like these ruins of Midgar, like I could imagine it, but not because the author was describing it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I kind of like had my assumptions about like what it basically must have looked like.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's very momentum focused, I feel like, this story. And that has a certain strength of its own, I think. But certain things are being emphasized. We should probably move through the plot points a little faster because things just keep on going. There's so many things that happen in this story.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, where we go after Midgar doesn't have a lot of plot content to it.
Is that Costa del Sol?
It's Junon, right?
Junon.
Yes.
Yeah, well, they have to go fetch the submarine because they know they're going to have to go underwater, and it's another side quest.
Lots
so
of
that's
side
it.
quests.
But like, I think that this one especially felt, because they go to get the submarine and they are stopped at the gate by some guards that say the new mayor of Junon has said that no one can get into the exactly. And so the new mayor of Junon directs them to doing a job where they go into
fetch quest.
It's just a fetch quest, and it's dubious whether they should actually be doing this. Yeah, and they don't really go into like really questioning this mayor's motives, which seems very unlike the party.
They're fetching him the plans for a Mako reactor from an Mako reactor.
Yes,
I didn't
exactly.
really see. I agree with this, and the funniest part is like it's kind of preceded by Barrett going in there trying to use his influence as the mayor of Coral, like before that, and it doesn't work, and then they have to do this. So it like sort of like I feel like it implies that the characters have like a different moral base than they did in the original. Like they're not eco-terrorists anymore, therefore they've like settled down and become mayoral people, but also like cogs in the machine.
Yeah, but that,
I don't know.
that
It was like
strikes
a lie.
me as so inherently untrue about these characters, because like questioning authority figures is how we got into the plot of Final Fantasy VII in the first place.
Now, to be fair, they don't approve of this. They're like, you don't want these Mako reactor plans to make a Mako reactor, do you? And he's like, no. My engineers just want to like adapt some things to make better power reactors. And they're like, And then like as they're doing it, they're like, well, you know what? If he builds a Mako reactor, we're just gonna come fuck this up. We're going to wreck his shit if he does. So like, sure, get him the plans.
And I think part of the story is that the driving thing is Cloud is increasingly more distressed
Right.
by having dreams of Aerith and like feeling like she's
Responsible for her death.
Yes, but feeling like she's calling out to him and wants him to come and resurrect her. And Tifa cares a lot about Cloud, and the whole party cares a lot about Cloud. So I think there's more and more emotional drive to resurrect, you know, their dear friend.
I mean, yeah, they care about Aeris too.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of something, that kind of gets, you know, the morality is less clear because the drive to resurrect her is so strong. Since Cloud personally, at this point, feels like she desires to be resurrected.
And certainly we've had a couple of snatches of Cloud's dreams which seem to indicate that he's being contacted in some way.
Yeah.
They're still a little bit unclear, but...
Yeah. Well, and another through line with Cloud that I don't know if we fully mentioned is like Tifa is the first one to present like Cloud's distress to, you know, other members of the party. I think it's with Barrett, but anyway, she says like, you know, he's been distant and he's been distressed and he's like not eating, he's not sleeping well. Like it's clear this is affecting him very, very deeply. So you can kind of see how he's not quite acting himself in a lot of ways because I don't know if we get a lot, like, Cloud just seems very distressed in this. Like
Cloud being distressed by strange voices, that sounds like just totally normal Cloud to me.
fair,
I mean,
fair.
yeah,
Perfectly
but
standard.
That
I
is
feel like
fair.
you should have learned some lessons from the last time this happened.
Yeah, because before he was being manipulated, like,
Yeah.
but anyway.
Yes, before he was being manipulated.
Yeah, well, anyway, let's go on to this fanfic. Let's see where it leads us.
At Costa del Sol, we get introduced to another villain, which is Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars. It's a crossover.
Okay.
No, okay, I'm not going to keep that up. It's a guy named Tarkin. It's not Grand Moff.
Isn't
but
it
that's-
spelled differently, too?
I don't think so. Tarkin? Isn't that
Oh,
it?
I thought it was
Sounds
An
right.
in this.
No.
Oh.
Although spelling names inconsistently is a theme of this fan fiction at some points.
Oh my gosh, it is. It's so weird.
We will get into that
Okay,
in the
sorry.
second
Yes.
part.
Yes.
Let's continue.
Actually, his name is Tarkin, you know, from the Japanese. So anyway, he's another ex-soldier, and he's like a protege of Sephiroth's. And he kind of...
So, actually,
Yes.
I think it is implied that he is one of the Sephiroth copies.
Oh, no, you're right, he is. He definitely
Yes.
is. You're right. He's one of the numbers. He's got a tattoo.
Although I like that
Right.
interpretation of him being a soldier a little bit better because if I recall my plot of Final Fantasy VII correctly, the copies of Sephiroth outside of Cloud were basically mindless. Like
Yeah.
they were subsumed by the will of Sephiroth.
He would have to be another
But-
super special one, but it's not really gotten
Cloud's
into.
not actually a copy of Sephiroth.
He is in the sense that he's been infected with Genova's cells.
Right. But, like, he was misled to believe that he was a copy, but then he's
Well,
infected with his cells.
it seems
With
like-
Genova, her, I guess, is the pronoun for Genova.
I
Yeah,
don't
whatever.
think it
The
has a
calamity.
gender.
It,
Yeah.
it sells. Anyway, point being, you know, we get more information on this in Advent Children too, but that has nothing to do with this because this fanfic doesn't have Advent Children information.
Whatever it is, it seems like Tarkin's basically another Cloud. And like he's got Genova cell access too. Doesn't he throw a Genova entity at them at one point again, like to fight?
Okay. But
That is something we'll get into, but yeah, he
Okay.
turns into a Genova like the other Sephiroth clones can do. So
Okay,
This
so
is-
Sephiroth clone.
I thought all the Sephiroth clones looked like Sephiroth did, right? Or no, did they all look different?
You see them. You only really see them in robes. You never really see them in the game.
yes.
Okay,
that
maybe
is
that
true.
was just my fake impression
No, I mean that would be a reasonable guess.
because they're clones. Like I just thought
Yeah,
that. But,
although
okay.
like
hear
the influence of Sephiroth on them because of like how the life stream works and how Genova cells infect people,
Sure.
they could like effectively turn into Sephiroth as this
Oh.
infects them, and I think that might have been the implication. I'm not entirely certain of that.
But in the game, they fight Sephiroth clones before they even meet the real Sephiroth, and they all look like him.
Yes. Yeah, you do see Sephiroth clones that do look.
So that's
like
why
Sephiroth
I was confused about this, is because I like just assumed that if they were all Sephiroth, like if he was they would be like, "Hey, you're Sephiroth, like you look like him," but I guess he doesn't. So,
right,
anyway.
because they were people. Like, clone is a bit of a misnomer for how this worked. Like, they were people who then got infected with Genova cells. So they did look like something before they turned into Sephiroth.
Oh, yes, that's a good point. All right, a lot to think about here. Anyway, let's move on with our story.
Yeah, so I was just saying that Tarkin comes in this whole sequence that has a couple of things going on at the same time. But, like, he's kind of he's another antagonist. That's kind of who he is. But he steps in to save the crystal material from being taken by the Turks at this point, and, like, has mysterious motives.
Yes. Isn't this in Rocket Town?
Oh, that would be in Rocket Town, you're right.
But yes.
Because that's also when other people have to go save Shera, who, if you recall, is Sid's secretary, assistant, domestic abuse victim. Like,
Oh, jeez.
Something like that.
No. Not according to the game, but I guess according to the...
That's what I remember from the game.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
No, like, what is she exactly? Like...
Yeah, they're...
Just the last one?
That was... I don't quite mesh with that. Sid is maybe not the best of human beings, but I don't think he abuses anyone other than potentially a little bit verbally, but he does that to everyone.
Well, I don't think he treats her well.
No, certainly not in this fan fiction. That is certainly true. But in the original game, not that great.
I agree with Amato. But anyway, go on. What were you going to say?
I don't remember FF7 well enough to know whether I'm exaggerating much. Just that, like, she should probably go do something else is all I'm saying. But anyway, she's been kidnapped.
Fair.
She's been kidnapped by another villain, which is, how do you say her name?
Lucretia.
Yeah. Now, Lucretia was last seen in the game kind of like being frozen but not dead or whatever. She's trying to get the crystal material to resurrect her son, which is Sephiroth. Remember, she's Sephiroth's bio-mom.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Which, and she's also apparently in a relationship with Vincent.
Used to be.
Was.
I thought they were in this fanfic in a relationship now.
No.
Or it was kind of hard to tell.
It's all about...
It was... There is an implication when Vincent shows up. He sort of talks about how he was trying to get through to her and talk to her previously, and then she sort of is being very obsessed with the idea of resurrecting Sephiroth. So
yeah,
that...
I kind of got the impression that, he felt like he was really getting through to her and things were okay, but then she kind of went off the deep end.
I think he's describing,
or was he describing
way pre-game
the past
stuff.
Okay.
Past stuff. Because
he
would only have seen her like stasis-ish in a cave, from the Final Fantasy VII game. I don't think anything was supposed to have happened in between them. In between then and this fanfic.
Okay, yeah, I thought he was trying to encompass recent events because I know it's been a long period of time, but I see now that I was talking about the past and talking about how losing Sephiroth kind of made her go off.
Yeah.
So.
She's wanting to resurrect Sephiroth. She's like, oh yeah, I know he's not a good person, but like these things that people have been accusing him of wanting to destroy the world are clearly not true. And she's also just kind of unhinged, and she thinks that Sephiroth's the only thing she has like in the world to live for. She's got weird powers. I guess they're supposed to be kind of Vincent-y powers because like she's controlling these like evil bat things. And Vincent's like, I have as much control over them as you at one point. And I'm like, you do? I don't know why you do. But I'm also not sure why she has control over them. So whatever, Vincent. Sure. Why not?
Isn't Vincent... His powers are from also experiments,
yes,
right?
It's all
from
hard
Hojo,
science.
Yeah.
So, but Lucretia wasn't...
Hard science in this world where magic exists.
Right.
I guess Hojo could have reasonably experimented on Lucretia.
Sure. I mean, I accept it. It's it just kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, he's...
Well, I mean, Lucretia is also a scientist as well, so...
Oh, that's true. She could have experimented on herself.
Like all good scientists. That's how you know you're serious about science. Experiment on yourself.
Of course.
So we now have our three factions. We have the protagonists. We have Lucretia. They managed to save, what's her name from her, by the way? That wasn't obvious. Shera. And we've got Tarkin, who is kind of a third party. And the protagonists still have the crystal materia, and they take it to where they need to take it, which is a vent into the life stream, which is underwater, which is why they needed the submarine earlier on. And things kind of come to a head there in various plot points. For one thing, there's a bunch of plot stuff. For one thing, Red has been in true fiction pacing fashion, translating on the go, and only once they get there is he like, oh yeah, I figured out the ritual for how to use this to bring back an ancient, and someone has to sacrifice their life. Sorry, I didn't mention that before. I just now read it. Like,
Yeah.
and they're like, great. And for another thing, you know, they're being pursued by the various villains, and like when Tarkin's getting close, at one point, Kate Sith is like, oh yeah, I've been spying for Tarkin. And you're like, Kate said.
Yeah, this was, I felt, I mean, in spite of Kate Sith having spied on you in the past, this felt a little bit disingenuous to the character.
Yeah, I was like, how do you even know this guy?
Right.
How did he know you? Why did he hire you?
Right. And like, even then, there is a justification which Kate Sith gives for why he didn't tell them earlier, which is that, like, he doesn't know how many spies Tarkin has around. They were, like, wandering through the forest for months.
He's in a very small group.
Because he says, like, oh no, but, like, now I'm kind of on your side, but, like, at the same time I've been spying against you, but...
I love the line. They ask him, like, you've been spying on us again, Kate Sith? He's like, no, I haven't been spying on you. I've just been telling him everywhere you're going and what you're doing.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. It's like he feels like he has to pretend to be a spy because there might be other spies.
It's the dumbest plot twist.
But he actually is just spying. Like, he's not doing anything that's not spying on them.
He was also like, oh, he wanted to figure out what Tarkin's plan was first before he tipped his hand about it. Because I guess if he told these people, one of them might talk to Tarkin and get, I don't know. Sid would like go send off a letter.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. He's like, I couldn't tell you that I was spying on you because if you were aware that you were being spied on, you'd give off the fact that you were aware that you were being spied on.
Well, that sounds like, fine. Sure, that sounds great if we know that we're being spied. If we know
like,
what.
No.
Yeah, it's probably the dumbest thing in this fanfic. But whatever.
It's not quite, to me, as dumb as Kate Sith. Speaking of Kate Sith being referred to as a robot multiple times, like, or referring to himself as like, hey, I'm a robot, so I feel like this. It's like, you're not a robot. You are a human controlling a robot. Like, stop. Everybody knows you're not actually a robot. All right, moving on.
I mean, most of the time...
It's called method acting, Tori.
Most of the time, that is... referring to his robot body, which I accept. He's like, as a robot body, I can do these things. But it's like, yeah, no one's like, so where are you based out of these days? Like, I don't know.
Well, because, like, I'm just sorry, it's just, I know we spoke about this before, but it's sort of implied that the character has only been sitting in their room, running around in a robot body, rather than living life as a human, and it's just weird. Anyway, let's move on.
Well, it's hard for him to get a new job in urban planning because all of his references were destroyed by Meteor.
So he just pilots a robot all day.
Wouldn't you? I would. It's a pretty cool robot.
That's true.
But I've got to say, why does it look like a cat riding a moogle? Like, why that?
Okay, so to be fair... You originally encountered Kate Sith in Gold Saucer, where that makes some amount of sense as a disguise. Kate Sith gets destroyed in the Temple of the Ancients, and he decides that the next robot in line should look exactly the same.
Well, at that point, he got attached to it, right? Like, this is me now.
He's just making out his spare parts. Like, you don't want to redesign the whole thing.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
Also, hiding in Gold Saucer was clearly the best play to make here.
Okay, but other than those plot points, it comes down to a confrontation between all parties here, right? And There's fights. They have some fights. The thing with Sephiroth's mom, I'm blanking on her name.
Lucretia.
Again. The thing with Lucretia is eventually resolved by talking it out, basically. I mean, removing all other options and then talking it out, but it's like, Vincent eventually kind of gets through to her about it, right? Sort of.
Right? Like, isn't it more along lines of like... Well, no, never mind. Maybe you remember better.
No, maybe I don't. Like...
there was a lot of conflict about this exchange of one person for another, and there was a deception being made. But there were multiple parties involved. Like, Lucretia wanted to resurrect Sephiroth. But
Tarkin wants to resurrect Sephiroth, but he wants Cloud to do it.
Right, because he wants Cloud to exchange... So he wants Cloud to think that he's resurrecting Aerith, and therefore exchange and actually get Sephiroth.
Yeah,
There's also the relevant
materia that relevant information,
minds.
Right. The relevant information that Cade Sith gives that would have been very useful to know earlier is that Tarkin has a materia called Influence that lets you plant suggestions in people's minds. Yeah. And, it's not... They describe it as opposed to manipulate, you don't just, control them and have them do a thing. And apparently it seems to take a really long time to work usually, even though it doesn't really work right now. But that's how he's been planting visions of Aeris in Cloud's dreams and getting him to do all this stuff.
Yeah,
Right. And it's also stated at this point, which I have a bit of a problem with, that this is what Sephiroth was doing to Cloud throughout the plot of Final Fantasy VII.
Yes.
Yeah.
Using this materia.
It was supposed to be the biological connection, though.
Right. It's... Yeah, I think that sort of dirties the plot of Final Fantasy VII a little bit, because I think it's important that it is just a pure battle of wills between Cloud and Sephiroth that sort of resulted in this. And the idea of them sort of being two sides of the same coin, sort of being biologically connected through Genova's cells is important to that process as well.
So I agree.
The relationship between them as foils
yes.
for the story. I completely agree, though I do though I don't like the author bringing in the influence, the yellow materia, and trying to extrapolate that back to the Final Fantasy VII plot. What I do like is that there's still kind of a battle of wills in this materia. Cloud is able to fight against the influence of the materia through a certain sense of will once he's aware of it. And so is someone else, I believe. I don't remember who.
Oh, by the way, I just glanced at the fanfic. The conflict with Lucretia came before they came to this underwater Mako cave. And so down here, it's just conflict against Tarkin. Part of that is a big fight scene. And here's where the materia really gets busted out. It's Tarkin spamming Ultima, Red is using, spamming Cure and stuff. They're using the materia.
Yes.
And they also pull out...
Well, Knights of the Round.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So it's canon that they spent far too much time racing chocobos. Probably while there was a big meteor hanging in the sky.
Yep.
In order to get this thing, right? That is definitely fanfic canon. Breeding chocobos.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it was really important. In fact, getting all of the materia was really important. You have no idea.
Right. And they beat him with... That's how they end the fight, is by doing Ultimate End. And you get a text description of what happens when you do... when you do Ultimate End, when you use Knights of the Round, including everything fading to black and then all those big figures, and, it's kind of totally silly, but at least it's kind of totally silly in a, fun way, I guess.
So, yeah, I get that part of it. I'm okay with the summons being canon to the actually what goes on in Final Fantasy VII fights. But what I find a bit weird about this is how it works on a power scale level. Because there's this sort of implication, especially in the fights leading up to this point, that there are some dire situations that they get in, and they don't pull out any of the really big powerful materia in any of those cases.
Right.
So I mean, the tension in those previous scenes just sort of fades away at this point.
You could have just Knights of the Round there too.
Yeah.
And then mimicked it.
Yeah.
And then mimicked that.
Yes.
Yes.
And what about 8 times cut? And all of the other weird, the full enemy skill materials that I'm sure they all have.
I don't think you can get 3 full enemy skill materials, can you?
Can, because you can cast spells from your
Oh.
enemy skill materia on other people that
Oh,
have
you
enemy skill
can. Oh, okay. Oh, that would have been way easier. I never knew that. I thought you had to go back to all the enemies and get them, which is why I only ever bothered doing 1 and maybe a half.
Oh.
Yes. I don't.
Bummer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, the author does kind of use a limited round of materia here, but I like that they kind of do that because they don't need to bust out all the materia. That would take a long time to describe how each materia has an effect. They kind of shorten it up.
You know what else I like?
That's fair.
It's a 2-stage boss fight.
Yes.
They beat Tarkin, and then there's a cutscene.
No. It's a 3-stage boss fight.
Oh, of course. Well, that's even better. Of course, it's a 3-stage boss fight.
Yes.
They beat Tarkin, and then in a cutscene, he manages to like lunge for the crystal materia, touch it, and use it to resurrect Sephiroth.
Yes.
Yes.
But I mean, so in between that, so they fight Tarkin very shortly.
Right.
He turns into a Genova version.
Oh, yeah.
And then once they've beaten that, he turns back and then does this and sacrifices himself to resurrect Sephiroth.
Right, because he sacrificed
Which
a life.
also, like, this is another part that I found was a little bit not terribly smart. Like, I understand that these people are in the middle of a fight, but they just sort of leave the crystal materia sitting on a table throughout this whole fight. No one
Yeah.
bothers grabbing it once. Like, if you
Yeah.
just stuck this in your backpack, you would be done.
And-
there would be no third stage to this boss fight.
Actually, before this, there was a whole thing where, like, Cloud was kidnapped and they were thinking he had the crystal materia, and it was, like, actually with Tifa, right? Like,
Yeah, that was when
and that
Tarkin
was-
stepped in to
yeah.
save Tifa from the Turks.
Yeah, and so it's like, it's kind of crazy they'd forget about it now after all of this focus and kind of this planning around it. But anyway,
Yeah, whatever. It's what has to happen.
it's what happened, yeah. And to be fair, I think the author's tackling a lot here. I think that's evidenced by how much we have to speak about in terms of just plot points. They're tackling a lot. They're almost making their own Final Fantasy VII-esque plot here. And so it's kind of hard to track all the details sometimes, even as a reader, but it's also, like, sometimes I think it would be impossible to actually have this read as Final Fantasy VII game plot perfectly. Though I think they did, not a bad job. It's just there's so much detail. Think about how long it takes to play Final Fantasy VII. So,
Yeah,
they,
I mean,
they
certainly-
had to skip through some things.
They had
is
no
all I'm saying.
wikis in 1998.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Fair point.
And also, I've been messing up the timeline again because, we have some other characters like Sid and Red and Kate facing off against the Turks and Lucretia at the same time.
Yes.
They also get to they all use summons. It's Judgment Bolt, Tsunami, and Tetra Disaster. I don't know if I would have used Remove. Okay. Anyway, the point is that they win that fight too. The Turks get to do a very Turk thing and just decide to walk off when they find out that Lucretia's planning on resurrecting Sephiroth, which they were not clear on. And they were like, "You mean the Sephiroth who wanted to destroy the world?" And they were like, we don't usually quit jobs, but we're quitting this job. We're out. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The world that we live on, like that world.
Just to be clear, yeah.
And but that means Lucretia's around.
And again, this is like, the Turks never asked this question up until that point. They never really made this detail super clear, because I feel like, I understand that these are basically the Yakuza, and they're not terribly scrupulous. But this just seems like a terrible oversight.
But that means Lucretia's around for when Sephiroth's resurrected, and she's like, "My son," and he's like, "You're not my real mom."
Yeah,
That's not how he says it, but yeah.
It's
it's
dangerously
worse than that,
close.
actually. It's literally worse than that. He is just like, I consider... that's basically what he says. He says, Genova's my real mother. You mean nothing to me. I'm gonna kill everybody because, I'm Sephiroth. And it's just...
And so that's the turning point.
And-
for
that's the
Lucretia.
turning point.
And and the Sephiroth writing is a little bit stilted in this. I would
It's not the
like
best
to
seller.
argue.
It is, and I also think that for Lucretia, her whole drive has been this is my son. And everybody's been telling her, Vincent at least has been telling her, he tried to kill everybody, even you. And she saw that in the past, and he basically...
Well, she didn't exactly see that, though. That's
Okay.
part of this.
So yeah, but
guess
this
that's
is
true,
this is a
but-
difference between Lucretia and this fanfiction and Lucretia in Final Fantasy VII, because in Final Fantasy VII you do get this implication that she has these terrible dreams about the things that Sephiroth is going to do, and she's like terribly distressed, and like when you encounter her in stasis in the cave, like this sort of comes to light that like she is really just sad about her part in everything that's happened up until this point. And that just doesn't seem to be her motivation here. Like, something has driven her to now believe that Sephiroth didn't do these things, as opposed to then.
Yes.
And there's no line drawn there that makes sense. It's just kind of,
Exactly.
you have to accept that that's what the character is doing in this story.
Yeah. So it's sort of like a repeat. Like, she sees again how terrible, you know, he actually is in real life and realizes her mistake. And I feel like it's very sad, but I feel like the author kind of glossed it a little. Like, her whole through line.
Oh, yeah,
like,
for sure.
But the feeling she would have had, you know, wanting to bring her son back and having him be so cold. Like, I just feel like they could have done a little bit more with her. Just like a tiny bit more.
Mm-hmm. And the fight against Sephiroth, who, you know, is tough to beat and all, it ends with it ends fairly suddenly. What they end up doing is, like, he's getting the edge on them. Cloud grabs the influence materia. Right? No, not the influence materia. This is just manipulate, right?
No, this is the influence materia.
But
it's been dropped by Tarkin.
But it's a yellow light blazing through Cloud's
it's
hands.
always been yellow.
It's always been yellow.
The influence material is yellow.
But this can't be influence because I thought it was established influence doesn't work like this. Cloud is trying to use it to get Sephiroth to go pick up the crystal materia and use it again.
My point is the materia they've been using this whole time is the yellow materia. But I don't know.
I think that this tracks because so like it's mentioned that you can use influence in a way that's more subtle, and you think that it's your idea. But then he
does also use it on Cloud in a direct.
Right. That's what he was.
Way.
Yeah, that's how he was trying to get Cloud to sacrifice himself.
Yeah. So Cloud starts to use influence to make Sephiroth use the crystal materia to bring back Aeris. And by the way, you have to have some kind of ancient Genova connection to sacrifice your life for this. So like, there's only like a few possibilities around here.
Yeah.
And you know, then it's a battle of wills. And then it's a Sailor Moon climactic fight scene where everybody comes over and one by one like lays their hand on Cloud's and like joins their will to his, and like a huge ball of light engulfs Metalia and she disintegrates, and they're all reborn as middle school girls to live a normal, peaceful life.
Yeah, that's how the fanfic ends.
Yeah.
Little did you know this was actually a crossover with Sailor Moon.
That's not quite what
They're
happened.
actually all resurrected as Sailor Guardians.
But everyone does.
I would read that fanfiction.
But everyone does come and join their wills in like forcing Sephiroth to do this. And of course, Lucretia joins in at the end. She's like, I love you, but you've been very bad. Which
is such a weird thing to say when you're killing your son.
I mean...
Not that there's an unweird thing to say when you're killing your son, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'll try not to do that at all. But...
yeah, good luck.
Well, I mean... Wait for whether or not they're trying to destroy a planet before you make that judgment. That's all I'm saying.
And they force him to do that. The light flares, and Aeris is back. And here's the thing. Aeris is back. There's like 5 lines.
Yep.
The fanfic ends.
Yep.
It's like, here's the last few lines. When the light faded, Cloud looked up immediately, eagerly. The first thing he noticed were green eyes, but these did not glow with the mark of soldier. These were kind and tender, surrounding by... that's just a mistake. Surrounding by Aeris' delicate features and long brown hair. Aeris, he said softly, hardly believing it. She smiled and stepped down out of the circle of light. Fully clothed, I assume. It's not mentioned.
Yeah.
It's good to see you again, she said, looking around at them all, not disoriented at all.
Well, her eyes are surrounded by her face, so hopefully her body is surrounded by her clothes.
I'll be damned we did it, Barrett said. He turned to look at Yuffie, who was still holding hands with him and Rude. They all hastily dropped hands and looked away from each other. Cloud and Tifa... Foreshadowing a future romantic triangle. No, not at all. Cloud and Tifa walked up to Aeris, still holding hands. Cloud turned too, faced the others, and took Aeris' hand with his free one, smiles on all their faces. Mission accomplished, he said triumphantly. Let's go home.
Yeah.
The end. No falling action.
No.
I would expect
Yeah.
an epilogue. And
Really
there's not
weird.
an epilogue.
There's not, but also this author wrote so many stories. I wonder if they were just like, oh, I'll
saving
deal
it.
with that
Yes,
later.
and start on the next
But
one.
That is true.
It did end abruptly, and that is a criticism of mine. Is it ended abruptly. So
Now, we have words about Final Fantasy VII and this fanfic, clearly, and we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes. And this is the first and shorter of 2 stories that we read for tonight in this series. So I'm making a executive call here that we're going to split this into 2 episodes. And so, and I mean, we're just going to keep talking about it tonight,
don't give it away, Amanda.
But
We got to keep
through
the mystery.
the magic of or audio editing,
We will
sorry.
just withhold content from it deliberately. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Like responsible content creators.
Exactly. So, no, what I mean is, we need a couple of final thoughts about this specific story to wrap it up. What did we not like about this story specifically? Like this first story that we read, The Search for Aeris. What do we think did not work well?
So I have thoughts on how the characters are portrayed, because that tends to be where my mind goes most of the time when reading through fan fiction specifically, but trying to make sure that the characters are consistent with their portrayals. And I think there was definitely a range in which characters were portrayed well and which characters were portrayed poorly for the most part. As far as well, I think that a lot of Cloud's thoughts came through pretty close to how the character acts in the game. You do get a lot of sort of like Cloud thinking through things, which like Cloud being very introspective is like just sort of how he does, and he will like be very terse about subjects. Like he will sum up his opinions about things very, very quickly and very shortly. And he'll also have just the same sort of oddity in like this sort of avoidance of cliches, or like this avoidance of things that people might normally say, because he's sort of arriving at the ideas through a different vector, like deriving his philosophy from scratch and saying things like "let's mosey" or yeah.
Takes a very specific philosophy to say "let's mosey." I agree. I think Cloud, I would also say Tifa, Red, Yuffie, all, maybe Sid, all seemed, and the Turks some of the time seemed pretty on point and like kind of really enjoyable to read.
Interesting. I had similar opinions, although I don't actually agree on the point of Red. Like, I don't think that Red sounded a lot like he did.
Oh, I guess you're right. Sid, not Sid. Red was kind of used more as an exposition machine a lot of the time in this story in particular, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. We had a discussion about it where we thought like he was just like very academic and distant and didn't have like as much personality as we felt like he should. But, we also talked about how like it's hard to read some of the personality with, the little information. Some of the characters in Final Fantasy VII have less dialogue. But this author's extrapolation of Red as an academic just felt kind of weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly he has some very academic qualities to him. He lives in Cosmo Canyon, which is this place where he is surrounded by all of this history and knowledge. But also, on the other hand, he is very like passionate and willing to state his opinion very directly, rather than sort of being more this sort of verbose character who is just like a font of exposition that we sort of get in this, which seems a bit away from the original character interpretation.
And then that also, obviously, we've complained about people like Kate Sith and Lucretia, and I mean, Sephiroth's not written very well.
Yeah.
To me, it's that they're all kind of written in a very limited way. And you pointing out that Red's used mostly for exposition points to that flaw for me, is that like characters are kind of used for a goal in the story. And I kind of think that might be the author just running out of either space or ideas, basically. They had to use Red for exposition because they didn't have another vehicle. And they had to shorten all of Sephiroth's lines into like very basic things because they were running out of, I don't know, time or energy to complete
I
the story.
mean,
That's kind of where I see it.
on one hand, I agree with you, but on another hand, like the actual script of Final Fantasy VII is not as long as you would really think that it is, because video game scripts have to be very concise with the way that they're written,
Not Planescape Torment.
unless you're Planescape Torment, wherein, I mean, some of it, honestly, a surprising amount of that game is actually voice acted, but oftentimes you will just get walls of text thrown at you.
Oh, yes.
And that is a lot easier to write than things that are going to, like, be displayed as dialogue, and you're going to have to go through whole dialogue trees for.
Right. Yeah, in addition to mischaracterization, I would say I think the structure, it's kind of amusing sometimes, the kind of like fetch questy nature of the story, but it's also just not great writing. It's kind of a weakness of this story, I think.
Yeah. I mean, some of it to me did feel driving enough, but I feel like by the time we were getting plans for a Mako reactor to get access to your submarine, we were definitely deviating a bit from good storytelling.
Yeah. That being said,
Positives.
I do think this story kind of felt like playing an RPG, and I wouldn't necessarily say it was specifically like playing Final Fantasy, because they were like, but regardless, it felt like playing a game because you have your side quests, and when the characters come in, they feel like how those characters came in Final Fantasy VII. Is just, you know, the hope for more characterization is, you know, that's a thing. But honestly, like, it was just fun to read it as if I was playing through the game, and maybe even like playing and seeing these characters for the first time would make it seem more like playing through the game. I really liked how it felt like the world was being explored and the quests were being had. And even the fights were like, here's where the materia come in, or, you know, etc. I felt like that was very strong.
Yeah, it was fun to come back to these characters again and this world again and kind of a similar tone adventure. And I'm sure if I had just been playing Final Fantasy VII and there's like literally nothing more to do and like I'm desperate for this content and this characters back in 1998, I can see especially how it would have been like, you know, a big draw.
Yeah. I feel like it was mentioned a little bit earlier, but they do have some very good, like, witty banter also in the dialogue that, like, does sort of feel like the way that Final Fantasy writing goes about having characters interact with one another, where they're playing off of one another and they're, you know, like, clash of personalities, and they're sort of having some form of mental sparring, some cleverness to the way that the dialogue's written. And I think that was written pretty well. Also, and I think this is a really minor thing to mention, but I was really struck by, like, there were a couple of scenes early on. One of them was when they went back into the Caves of Gi to get the books. And one of them was when they were in Wutai in the chapter after that, you know, climbing up the mountain to get leaves for Yuffie. But in the first scene, you have, like, this scene of Tifa where she's being freaked out by, like, the shadows in the darkness, which are the Gi warriors. And she, like, focuses on Cloud's back, and by being able to do that, she's able to, like, stop herself from being as scared and just focuses on following Cloud. Yeah, we get a similar scene in Wutai where she sees Cloud climbing up to get the branch for Yuffie, and he can't quite get it there, so he says, someone else could climb up and I'll boost them up. And Tifa says, okay, I can do that. I saw exactly what you're doing. I was paying enough attention, and she was, like, paying enough attention to what Cloud was doing while he was climbing that she can climb up, like, much faster than he did, because, you know, like, those sort of scenes really spoke to, like, the reasons that Tifa looks up to Cloud and the reasons that is really advantageous to her character, the way that she follows Cloud and the way that she like empathizes with Cloud and thinks of Cloud. And I thought those scenes were really effective to me because they sort of like enforced the metaphor of the way that this character thinks about the world and the way this character acts and why it's useful to them.
The author states in some of the notes that Tifa's like his favorite character, and that I think comes through with the attention that's paid to her and like her thoughts and characterization.
Yeah, it was a strong characterization of Tifa, for sure.
Now, this was episode 59 of Retro Fanfic Retrospective. The Search for Aeris, which is the first episode, or first story in the Final Fantasy VII Internet series by Frank Verderosa. You can find a link there at bit.ly/RFR series to the copy on fanfiction.net at the moment. Next week, we'll be coming back with the second story in the same series, The Red Fist, with more of that Final Fantasy VII tangents that you've come to expect while listening to this episode right now.
Yes. So you know like 90% of the content.
The intro song is The Weekly Fare off of the album Poppy's Incredible Adventure by Komiku. The outro song is Run Against the Universe from the same album. You can find this album and other works by Komiku at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. You can find our website at retrofanficretrospective.podbean.com or bit.ly/retrofanfic. If you have questions, comments, or thoughts about the episode, contact us on Twitter at retrofanfic or Facebook at retrofanfic. We've got Reddit at fanficretrospective, or send us an email at retrofanficretrospective@gmail.com. If anyone uses email anymore, I don't know. You can also leave comments or reviews on Apple Podcasts or whatever service you use, and those would all be appreciated and probably reach us just fine. I'm Amato.
I'm Tori.
And I'm Chris.
We're just a party of 3 Earth life forms. Everybody else in our group is waiting somewhere else, trying to be nice to each other. Until next time, take care. I like in, all these old translations, those lines that like will never get changed in an English translation because they're too iconic.
Oh yeah.
Like Spoonie Bard is one of them.
And I mean, to be fair, like people find that odd and funny, but it's totally in character. It's a wonderfully well written line because
great.
Tella is like this crotchety old man who has an extremely large vocabulary and a willingness to utilize just obtuse words at people.
And I don't know if they have retranslated 7 for like the re-release just now, but like there's no way they changed some lines like Golden Shiny Wire of Hope or like...
Yes. Well, I mean, yeah, that's also a very barren line.
So,
I would...
It's just such a good line.
I'd be willing to believe that is something that was also in the original script.
I'm sure it is. I just mean like they won't change. They wouldn't change the wording for those iconic lines.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Like I'm sure that is basically what he said,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't have to translate it with those words, except that you would because I would not stand for it, and neither would any other fan if they changed that exact wording.
Yes. I mean, but yeah, Final Fantasy is sort of inherently full of those, like, it's not devoted to its seriousness to the point where it won't have things that are sort of off the wall or funny or like...
Every Final Fantasy I translation has had I, Garland, will knock you all down.
Yes,
in the
exactly.
same way.
For one of a boss which is decidedly more pathetic than most of the monsters that you find in that dungeon.
But yeah, it's a good point. There's those really humorous parts that stick with you.
I remember the hardest thing in Final Fantasy I being just getting to level 2 out in the wilderness fighting imps. It's like,
oh god, that's certainly...
those first few fights.
It really depends on who you bring in your party too, because there is so much of a difference between, like, you have a fighter in your party or you don't. And that's not necessarily an obvious choice.
No, I mean, you're like, monk is fine, right?
Yeah.
Instead of, or black belt, whatever, black belt instead of fighter. I just need someone to, like, hit things, but it's not the same. Not early on.
Yeah.
No, it's never the same.
Red mages can use swords, so that makes them a secondary
exactly.
fighter, right?
They're basically fighters. They do all of the things that a fighter does, right?
Just badly.
Okay.